Hi, I'm Bob Flisser, author of Become a Photoshop Expert in a Day by Mastering Layers. And I want to show you a great feature that's new in the 2020 version of Photoshop, both Windows and Mac, called the Object Selection tool. Now, in previous versions of Photoshop, you could select objects fairly quickly using the Magic Wand tool, which goes by color, or the Quick Selection tool, which goes probably by contrast. Kind of hard to say. But in the 2020 version, Adobe really streamlined it with the object selection tool. And that's what I want to show you. Let's take a look. So in this image, the kayak on my favorite lake in my favorite state of Vermont really pops out, and it's much brighter than the sand in front of it and the water behind it. You notice there's a couple of rocks, a couple of large rocks behind it, and that may cause some issues. But anyway, let's see what's going on here. So the first tool in Photoshop, as always, is the layer tool. But if you come down here a little bit, here is the magic wand, and if you click and hold it, you can see there's the traditional magic wand, there's the quick selection tool, and in the same group is the object selection tool. Now, when you do that, you notice that the toolbar on top, the control panel they call it, has a few options, and these are the default options we're looking at now. And you see that the mode is set to rectangle, and we only have one layer here, and you'll notice in the layers panel that it's not locked. And let's just try it without doing anything else, just using the default settings. So when I bring the mouse pointer into the image, the mouse pointer is a crosshair, and I'm just going to make a rectangular selection around the kayak. And you notice that the bottom of the selection is kind of cutting into the shadow underneath a little bit, and I let go, and it selects the kayak pretty well. You notice that large rock in the background is selected, and also if you take a look at the seat, a little bit of the seat is not selected. The top of the seat is not selected. So that's okay, and we could use other tools. We could use the lasso tool, we could use the object select tool, several other tools to go and adjust what should be or should not be selected. But let's go and save some of those steps by selecting this a slightly different way. So I'm going to deselect. I'm just going to press Control D or Command D on the Mac to deselect. And up here in the control bar, where it says rectangle, I'm going to click that and choose lasso. This gives me a tool kind of like the regular traditional lasso tool. So I'm going to start over here, just above the tip of the bow, and I don't have to be all that careful. I'm not trying to get an exact selection, but you notice that I am dragging this lasso tool through the shadow. So that is a way of telling Photoshop that I really don't want the shadow to be part of the image. And I'm also cutting through this rock here in the back and this other larger rock in the back. I'm going to make sure to get the whole seat. And at this point, I'm fairly close to the starting point. It's just water between the starting point and where the mouse pointer is now. So I'm just going to let go. And you notice the selection is a lot better. And let's zoom in. I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and roll the rolly wheel on the mouse, or you can do a two-finger slide if you're using a touchpad. And now it's really not a lot of work to go and add this little bit of seat to the selection. Now, if I simply go and do that now, what's going to happen is I'm going to lose my original selection. So what I want to do is I want to add to the selection. So I'm going to go up here on the control bar, and I'm going to click the second button here, Add to Selection. Or as an option, instead of clicking that, I could continue using the regular New Selection and just hold down the Shift key to add to the selection. Whatever floats your boat. Yes, pun intended. And now I'm going to just kind of roughly add like that. But this may not give me what I want. Watch what happens. When I start selecting like that, it gives me this kind of weirdness. Photoshop really doesn't know if I want part of the water, if I want part of the seat. So I'm going to undo. I'll just press Control Z in Windows or Command Z on the Mac. And now I will just go to the Quick Select tool. So I go back Here to the object selection tool, I'm going to choose quick selection. And you notice on the control bar there's a little plus next to the mouse pointer. I'm going to make this brush a little smaller. I'm going to tap the left square bracket. So you could tap the left square bracket to make the brush smaller, right square bracket to make the brush bigger. That's in both Windows and Mac. And now I can add that area without too much trouble. I see there's a little bit of extra water over there, so I'm going to go to the regular old lasso tool, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and just get those few pixels out. And that looks pretty good. Let's pan through it. I'm going to hold down the space bar, and I can go through, and I see this is a pretty good selection. Now I notice that this handle in back isn't selected, so I could just go back. And again, there's all kinds of little tweaks that you might need to make. So I'm just going to go back to the quick selection tool and grab that there. I'm going to make the brush a little smaller. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit more. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac to get a minus to get a remove, so I can remove the background there. So there's all kinds of little pushing and shoving that you might need to make. You can't always get a selection perfect. So sometimes you might just need the old-fashioned lasso tool or some of the other tools. There's nothing wrong with combining tools to get your selection and deselection. Remember, it's the Shift key will add to a selection, the Alt key or Option key on the Mac will remove from a selection. I'll just press Control 0 or Command 0 on the Mac to zoom out, and I have a pretty good selection right there. Let me show you one other way you can use the Object Selection tool. First thing is, I don't want to lose this selection, so I'm going to go to the Channels tab over here, and down on bottom I'm going to click the second button there to save that as an alpha channel. I'll just call that Kayak 1. Oops. Let's go back to the RGB. I'll go back to layers, and I'm going to deselect, so I'll press Control D or Command D on the Mac. So let's go back here to the Object Selection tool, and instead of using the lasso or the rectangle, we can use the Select Subject button right up here on the control bar. And when I do that, you notice that Photoshop does pretty much the same thing as when I use the rectangle tool. Those two big rocks in the background are selected, but you notice that the seat is selected a little better. Let me show you one other way that you can use the Object Selection tool. Again, I'm going to deselect, and this time I'm going to click the button for Select and Mask. And here you have some fine-tuning options. I'm just going to go here and select Subject. And you notice what it does is the background is kind of masked out, is kind of behind our opaque mask. And once again, Photoshop has those two rocks selected. Now, I can go and I can change the transparency here. This is not changing what's selected. This is simply changing what I'm looking at. And I'm going to go here to Edge Detection, and I can change the radius. I'll tell you now, in this particular image, none of these options are going to get rid of those rocks. But these are really changing what Photoshop is seeing as the edge of the object. So how smooth is the transition between what's selected and not selected? Feather kind of fades a little bit. Contrast, this is going to look at contrast between the foreground and the background. Shift Edge, you can go and expand or contract how many pixels are selected. And if you get a good selection, then you could go over here to Output Settings. And you can choose, well, do you want to send this to a layer mask, or a new layer with a layer mask, and so on. We don't have time to talk about layer masks in this video. If you go to my Photoshop Expert in a Day by Mastering Layers course, we will talk all about layer masks. So I'm simply going to send this to a new layer. Click OK. And here is the original layer. If I turn off the new layer, here's the original layer that we had. Turn that off, I'll turn on the new layer. And now what I could do is simply go in and maybe use the regular eraser tool, make that a little bigger, to start erasing pixels. So that's just another option, another way of doing this. For this particular image, I don't think this is really what I want, so I'm just going to delete it. I'll turn back the original one, go to Channels, and I will hold down the Control key or the Command key on the Mac, click, and there I have my selection. Now you could do whatever you want with the selection, just like you would anywhere else. Maybe I'll just go up to Layer, choose New, Layer via Copy, and there it is. There's a kayak. And we might have a little bit more of adjustment to do down on the bottom there, but you get the general idea. So that is the new object selection tool in Photoshop Creative Cloud 2020, and I will see you on the water.